build your own AI. We'll explore. Help the future hand in hand in this tech-driven wonderland.
Okay, hello to the new episode of AI Office Hours. We have a great group here today. Let's start with Nate. Do you wanna, and Marco, do you wanna guys introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Nate, co-founder of Bitte Protocol, previously Mintbase, the old NFT marketplace. We've recently discovered in the last year of in the last 5 years of building an NFT marketplace, within the last year of integrating with ChatGPT and some other bits, we've learned we can do anything on our NFT platform through prompts. And so that's led us to believe we can now do DeFi swaps, and now we're in this magical position of cross-chain signatures. So we're super excited to have our new name. Bitte Protocol. It means please in German. Please AI build and execute this transaction for me, and I'll hand it off to our other co-founder, Mikro, who's been driving a lot of our AI initiatives, also the CTO of Mintbase.
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much summed it up. But yeah, I've been in the NEAR ecosystem for about 3 years with Mintbase, as long as I have been in the NEAR ecosystem. And super excited for what's to come and what we've been building in the AI space. Do you want to take it away, Wansu?
Oh, yes. My name is Wansu. I'm co-founder of Exabits. We're in the business of building the layer 0 for decentralized compute, and we service some of the biggest and most renowned compute marketplaces in the world. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Good to have you guys. So I know you guys had some questions from before, so maybe we can launch into some of that. I guess, I'm sure, Nate, you have a lot of questions, so.
Sure. So I was recently watching Black Mirror, rewatching it. So the episode 2 to me was the most like intense one. I think this was like from like over a decade ago, maybe even more, where everything was a number, right? Whether you brush your teeth, you get a number reduced. Whether you're watching a horrific ad, and if you're not watching it, you have to reduce your number. And basically the people are just spinning their bike all day to accrue more number, right? This is like the evil world that we're probably actually heading towards, especially with AI. So the big question is, how is connecting NEAR protocol and the open source world going to help sort of not have that world? Because the ideal world is we all don't work anymore, right? We all have these efficient machines doing efficient things, but I mean, how do we get to that? And what's your sort of open take on the savior of the anti-Black Mirrorification?
Yeah, I also remember that the person who really wanted to fix the system in that episode ended up being a big part of it. Yeah, but well, I guess I actually don't know. I didn't see that episode when it came out, so it's hard for me to tell how relatable it was back then. But yeah, it is getting more and more relatable. That's certainly. And I mentioned it, I think, like a couple of episodes again. But like every breakthrough that happened since like the advent of internet has been, has been improving our lives in some ways, but was also making it more and more Black Mirror-ish. And then, like social networks, generally Web 2, right? And I think the big part of it is precisely because. So I think there are two parts here, right? I think both this episode and there's another one called Nosedive, which is sort of with a similar message. I think they sort of present two different aspects of it. Right? So one of them is a society, right? So like there's a big part of it which has nothing to do with centralization. That society is building, other. So that I don't think we will address in any way. That needs to be addressed, collectively as humans. But another one is that, as centralization, or rather, as every breakthrough happens, so far historically, it inevitably becomes controlled by a small group of people who, the moment they fully capture the market, they optimize for revenue, not for value, right? And obviously, optimizing for revenue sometimes is aligned with optimizing for value, but not always, right? And example I like using is that if social graph was a public good, we would have way more usages of it than we actually have today, right? Primarily today, it is used, for engagement farming, and it optimizes for revenue, doesn't optimize for value at all. And so in this case, AI could be a very big change in the way we do everything. And if it is again controlled by a small set of people, whatever values they, state today, those values can change, similarly to how Google was "don't do evil" and became what it is today, right? And like I think there's a good chance that Larry and Sergey had that value back in the day when they started, right? So like whatever values those companies stay today, they will change, right? Once you become, a $1 trillion company, you naturally become this, profit-making machinery. So it's very important that for AI there is a I think it is early enough that a sufficiently strong effort to make it free and open from the get-go will win, and then we will at least avoid that pitfall, and we'll have a strong technology which works for the good of people, not for the small set of investors.
Yeah, I would add that figuring out how do we have a more collective good optimization, right, versus single centralized optimization, which is just a natural way. Like if a centralized company trains a model, whatever kind of individual pieces are trying to do, at the end, it's going to be for the benefit of that centralized company, right? That's just how this thing works. And so I think blockchain have been struggling with this, like, hey, this is a way to organize people at scale for collective good. And it's easy to do when it's something that's like very simple to describe, right? Let's all just hash, and find an answer starts with 0, and that actually protects network. And it gets harder and harder, right? With things like Gitcoin been trying to do this at like in a more kind of abstract ways. And so I think like here we have something that's like extremely demanding figuring this out, where we need to globally have a model that's optimized for success of individuals and communities versus optimized for any single company success. And that's indeed very challenging. Hansu?
You're muted, Nate.
Yeah, and it's already doing its job, right? A little bit, even though you're working with private LLMs. We're also dealing with private financial systems with their own closed systems, whereas blockchain is already open source, right? So if we have that bridge, we're already sort of doing the good. Like we don't have to do much more because we're now bridging that, working with open source contracts, working with a much more open world. Even if we're still working with closed source big models, we're kind of already starting that step forward into the non-evil, or being able to interact with different contracts that can be replaced by other folks that can fork and do something a little bit better.
Hansu, do you want to say something?
Sorry, I wasn't too sure about the formatting. No, I think that's an important question. But can we switch gears and perhaps discuss another topic?
Yeah,
so,
go ahead.
I was just following what's been happening with NVIDIA in the marketplace. I don't know if any of you guys are. The big news is NVIDIA briefly last year, surpassed the market capitalization of Microsoft and Apple, and since then it's sort of lost some steam. But one of the big questions that I'm grappling with these days is sort of the long run vision of where things are headed with AI. So when you see this big rise in the spotlight of NVIDIA in the public markets, the first question is where is the value chain? Where is a lot of this value in AI going to be captured? And it appears right now NVIDIA is certainly kicking butt in doing that. And then when you look at the competitive landscape of AI models, you have Claude from Anthropic, you have Mistral, Bard from Google, Meta, everyone's building their own AI. And then I recently came across this research paper by MIT researchers. It's called the Platonic representation hypothesis. Okay, and so these authors, they found that representations in AI models, particularly deep networks, are converging. So as models get larger, different neural networks representing data are becoming more aligned. And the implication is that there's going to be this, in the long run, a convergence of all of the models. The more and more you train them with more data and more parameters, they will essentially become all identical. So I'd like to get your thoughts on this. And I mean, like an immediate sort of a follow-up that comes to mind is, if these models are converging, OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral, what are their moats in the long run, right? Or do they just become completely indistinguishable? I want to open up the floor and get your thoughts.
I think interesting question is, do they already have, do they have a moat today? Let's say models do not converge, right? I think they at the given size with the given amount of data, the capabilities are sort of similar. So in the absence of a breakthrough, you do not get much of a mode, right? So like Mistral and Llama, they kind of already somewhat indistinguishable from perspective of the downstream tasks. I think the fact, if the models actually converge, right? I skimmed the paper before this call, but I didn't look very deeply. But if they indeed converge, that's actually good news. That effectively means that at some point there is no benefit in creating more and more models. So once you have one model that very close to that convergence, it's as good as it gets. So that is potentially good news, especially if it also implies, I don't know if it implies it, but if it implies that there is a plateau, at which point you cannot go any further, that's even better. That means that the models will not be getting better and better and will not eventually replace us. Right. It's even better if that plateau is our level of intelligence. That would be outstanding. Yeah.
Well, I think, there's a few interesting points here, right? One is you asked about the value chain. And indeed, right now, we see massive investment in kind of compute, because even if the training itself is, takes 10, 20, 50,000 GPUs, the thing is that the inference can take any amount of GPUs right afterwards. Because if now you're doing inference kind of, one token at a time, you can imagine as this instrumentation gets more sophisticated, you will want to run, chain of thought. You'll want to run multiple models at the same time to on different subtasks. So you can imagine that the amount of compute you can, spend an inference will not be bounded by any kind of magnitude. So even if we imagine let's imagine we trained the, indeed what Alex said, the gold model that's this is final model. We don't need to train anything new. Although obviously there's lots of asterisks and discussion there. But even then, at an inference time, you can use as much compute as you want, right, to actually produce the result you want, right? And we already see this with, you run multiple agents, they themselves refining results. They read, read the context and maybe like, oh, let me write that, let me run it with tests, let me do this and that. And so indeed, I mean, clearly the market, reacts to that there's like this amazing, massive investment in the hardware that happens. Will that stop? I mean, probably not anytime soon, right? Just because, as I said, like there's just so much more you can do if you have that compute at inference time. And if you multiply it by 1 billion people, well, you need like massive amount of this to serve it. Now, indeed, on the training side, I mean, I've been saying this for over a year now that I think like foundational models will be a commodity, and kind of indeed they may not be like completely converging, but it makes sense that at the end, you're training it on somewhat the same data, you're using the same method. It kind of makes sense you get the same results at the end. So I don't know. I haven't read the paper outside of abstract, so I'm actually curious what are they comparing, because obviously you cannot go and compare ChatGPT to Claude outside of maybe the embeddings that they surface.
Right. And it appears, if you're using the same data, the underlying mathematics is roughly equivalent. And then right, it just comes down to who has access to most compute, so they can have the biggest and the most complicated model. Now, so for me, when I think about this, I also I think there are some really important implications about ownership. So let's say scaling, we're sort of nowhere near the plateau. So we get, you can hear guys like Mark Zuckerberg on his podcast, in their Facebook, in the Meta Labs, they have yet to see any signs of diminishing marginal returns to scaling. They're seeing like, the more you pump up the models with more compute, more data, it's doing more and more fascinating things. So let's then assume that, for a moment, that we can continue to scale up, the models become bigger and bigger, and sort of just seeing and going back to the whole NVIDIA story of where things are with them. Since compute at scale is just so capital intensive, right? This is the reason why only big tech companies are really able to even carry out the ambition of training these large scale models. It seems like a scenario in which several competitors, spending hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars to replicate essentially the same AI just seems too inefficient to be viable, right? So if one is convinced that AI brings immense public value, I certainly am, then one can apply the reasoning that large investments with really challenging economics that provide significant public benefits are typically financed, by a central public authority, right, or the government. So think of utilities, infrastructure, or other investments that require, really complex multiple stakeholder alignments, highways, the power grid, gas pipelines. You can name them. So, is there a future in which the U.S. government will attempt to fund and subsequently hold ownership of an AGI? I guess we're already seeing this is the case in China, and kind of thinking ahead, just as Elon Musk had to innovate and engineer reusable rockets to bring down the cost of launches, demand for scaled compute will need to discover some dramatic efficiencies to remain privatized, right? And I guess, or maybe the need for some sort of creative ownership structure is where we may get substantial input or even a solution from Web3. And this was sort of where I started to connect the dots and see, where to find that intersection between decentralized compute or AI and where the scaling needs are. But I'd love to get your further input on this.
Oh, I would really hope to never have the governments run the full AI system. So, have you ever been to a California DMV? Have you ever been to like it's just so slow and brutally, and that's why NASA is basically getting overrun by SpaceX.
I'm not a proponent of a central ownership, certainly, right? But just looking at historical examples, when you need a ton of resource to build out something that everyone agrees has tremendous value, is AI going to enhance human productivity? Absolutely yes, right? So it's sort of inevitable reality that someone somewhere is going to build this AGI, right, with enough resources. But typically, when you get, historically, when you have something that's incredibly capital intensive, and if what everyone is competing to build out essentially the same thing, and it costs trillions of dollars to build, in equilibrium, it's most likely a much bigger socially neutral agency is going to build that. So if we were to avoid that fate, what are some things that we would have to see develop? And one idea is, Web3 brings in this very creative decentralized ownership model, and I think that's one of the aspects that people haven't really thought very hard, as much as we want to see this intersection in Web3 and AI.
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, like we need to figure out. I mean, this is literally the problem of the public goods funding, right? Just at the larger scale that so far it's been tested out in crypto, and sadly, beyond. I mean, like the biggest working public goods funding is Bitcoin, where everybody runs a miner and they're getting funded for doing that. And so there's a clear protocol how you get rewarded for providing public good service while you have a self-interest in participating in it. And so in a way, like we kind of need very similar mechanism, but with a lot more fine-grained research focus, right? Where like I actually don't think like, going and massively training massive modeling at this point isn't that interesting, because like we've seen, some of the new papers showcasing that even with smaller models, if you leverage search or like Monte Carlo search or using to reinforce doing thought tokens internally as you predict things, you're able to kind of increase the capacity of the model, just again because you're moving the compute pretty much out of the weights into the kind of at inference time to actually into activations. And there's also just, I mean, the fact that also this new paper on inductive bias through backpropagation is also crazy, right? I don't know if you guys seen, but they pretty much fine-tuned on examples, and the model was able to pretty much infer the function from fine-tuning. So we clearly have like new methodologies that are, I think, emerging around using optimizers, using search and kind of intermittent thought process inside the model to actually improve the results. And so what we're now missing is really an ability to coordinate researchers to really swarm on these ideas and test them out and see exactly where the ins and outs of this are. Because the challenge is like somebody published a paper, there's some source code, they did it on like a 7B model with a little bit of fine tuning. And like you don't really know how much more you can do. You don't know if it works on 70B. So I think this is where we have right now an opportunity where, you guys as Exabits, for example, can be like, hey, we're actually going to give a grant to these researchers for this amount of compute. And this is actually something we're trying to work out how to do effectively. But let's try to run this model, like train this model on 70B now, and like, again, fine tuning from existing model and see, if this properties hold. If they do, then, potentially this is state of the art across a bunch of parameters. And now this is still all in open source because we kind of gave a grant for this to be in open source, and you get, promotion pretty much from doing this as well. And so people want to use it for inference because they know it runs on your hardware in the first place. So I think like that's kind of what we're missing is like some of this mechanism of collaborative funding research, where we have researchers right now making progress, not on like, let's train a bigger model, right? I mean, the amount of research there is like go into config, add a 0, right? Start, and then babysit that gigantic model that, you know, crashes all the time, versus like people actually making progress on, you know, structure and you know, ways to optimize things. And then like, how do we fund that? How do we leverage that? And again, how do we like replicate it in such a way that then people know, okay, this is actually works, let's incorporate it into next technique. So yeah, that I pretty much agree with you. And I think Web3 is like have the methods and actually funding to do that now and actually showcase, not on kind of some like, you know, in theory, you can train a bigger model, right, as you collect a lot of clusters, but actually like we can get interesting research out of the existing academia researchers by just being able to provide them access and kind of manage that a little bit more freely and fluidly.
Right, and you know, our business mission is very much aligned with that view, and we take it very seriously upon ourselves to kind of provide that sort of democratization and access to compute, you know, for various like these other applications that are currently under research, and to make it equitable for anyone to access compute, you know, who want to build out models. But
Neat. I got a question. So if since I have you guys, I'm excited to ask. It's fun to talk about tomorrow and what's coming up in the future, but it's also really fun to talk about what do we have now, what can we play with today on NEAR, and where things are heading. So I'm sure you've sort of seen we've built that AI agent, allows you to generate images, builds a transaction that you can execute, you can create drop links. We've now built a ref finance agent that allows you to do DeFi, swap this for that. And we're going to be opening up that agent marketplace for other folks to start plugging in. Potluck just took them 3 days to build basically their core pits of their agents. So you'd be able to say, fund this company for that. Where do you want to see this heading? Where should we start plugging away today? And where do you see value in basically AI building transactions first? And B, what interesting use cases should we really tackle if you think that there's value there? Because again, I think we're building the Black Mirror kind of theory. It's being able to communicate with the financial system through human readable conversations. And I'm just curious to get your input on what we've built so far and where we can head to help push the NEAR ecosystem further.
I mean, I think the biggest opportunity right now is to find the consumer applications which can integrate this, right? I mean, there's few interesting consumer applications in crypto that can leverage this right away. Usually they are in already existing chat environment. So this is Telegram and Discord bots, where if you plug that in and create an economic incentives around, for example, community managers and kind of channel server owners to benefit from originating transactions from these channels, you know, make it really easy to create your accounts either through existing wallets or embedded wallet directly there. You can pretty much like supercharge both Web3 adoption and kind of amount of accounts that are transacting through this, because, you know, to just give you an example, like Collab Land, right, has over, I think on their website, over 10,000 users across Discord and Telegram, across 50,000 different communities. And so, you know, you can imagine that bot becoming also originating transactions through natural language. Same, you know, with Hot, with the Telegram bots as well. So I think, and then obviously going into Web 2 as well and seeing how to connect with their existing ecosystems and, you know, turning on pretty much the financial component of what right now a lot of these assistants are just like, here is a bunch of stuff you can do, and then you still need to go and like book it and figure it out yourself, right?
The real crux of that is that you're, you know, incentivizing folks. So how much is it folks that are actually wanting to get value out of what you're doing, or how much of it is folks that just want to get paid with the token. So it's something that we're looking into deep, and it's kind of a weird line that we're trying to ride. But Alex,
I mean, so oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Illia. I'm curious your answer.
No, well, I think, I mean, the general expectation should be you should like same as credit card, right? You should not give 100% money back. That just doesn't work. You should get, if you're building out a loyalty pad program, which is what all of these token user distributions are, they should be percentage of the value that is being transacted. And at the same time, it should be something that's like below the margin that you're capturing. Then it's a sustainable program that you can run. I think crypto indeed kind of went into like, hey, we're going to just, we need to distribute this token, so we're going to spend all of it kind of at once for everyone who's even, barely tried our product. That obviously is not a good idea. Although, for a while, that's been the way people want to approach it. But you can imagine, this is a growth engine. So like, how do you create a loyalty program that, benefits from that? And potentially, you're overpaying in the beginning with the idea that your margins will improve over time. But I think the benefits you potentially can have is transitioning away from, like, it should be valuable for the users to originate transactions. But the people who may be teaching and encouraging and providing a UI, etc., like you can pretty much reward them, which will be a lot less. Like, again, if you integrate it into some bot, you either rewarding the bot creators or the communities that installed this bot. Again, in Hot, there's villages and Collabland and all of those, like there's servers that are actually, there's community managers behind them, and so they can be the ones educating the user base about what they can do through this, and so you can reward them versus individual users there. And so you're kind of preventing a lot of the negative of usage farming, right? Engagement farming that happens.
Transaction building, real world use cases. You got any, Alex?
I think anything which is more complex than like a simple transfer could benefit. Like I think as an example, as simple as staking is causing a lot of confusion. So if that was possible, like I go there and like I have like a simple task of I guess especially. Like even with the example of staking, right? Even staking on itself could be confusing with like, hey, there's like a withdrawal, interval, etc. Then you have liquid staking, restaking, etc. I think like going there and communicating with something that will tell you your options and executing it from there is quite helpful.
Yeah, from a single prompt as well. You're not going from one UI piece to another. You're not going to ref to something else. You're in the single prompt where it's like swap this token for this token. Now stake it, stake half of it, and then send the other half to my Ledger wallet, right? All within a single prompt. And these things we can start doing with like bulk prompts, right? Being able to send multiple transactions through a single prompt, right? Mint an NFT, generate the image, load it to Arweave, list it for $5. Could be one single prompt, and and do one on ETH and do one on NEAR. It sounds crazy, but this is where we're at. It's I just think it's working and focusing more on the agent side is and incentivizing those agents to build better agents is probably where we're going to be touching in. Micro, you got anything?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking, since you're talking about the multiple prompts or, submit a prompt that's composition of multiple prompts, I was wondering to hear your guys' thoughts on the future of prompt engineering. Is it, a real thing? Will it become like even more of a real thing in the future? Or, as models evolve and like kind of understand better and better like what users want, it will kind of fade away over time.
UI generation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a combination of things, right? Because you still, unless it's like a completely autonomous agent that, goes and figures out everything from A to Z, and you just gave it like a super high level task. The problem is like you still want something that's like, so I mean, the example we're doing on AI developer right now, it's not even about the prompt. It's like you still want to have a conversation with it, because as part of that conversation, it refines your understanding and kind of you answer questions, you have trade-offs, you like figuring out what needs to be done. And so even if the model itself is kind of conditioned on that, you still need that kind of like, I wouldn't call that prompt engineering per se, but like you need that conversational system that actually figures out from the user what you want, right? And so that can come in the form of a one-shot prompt where like I just know exactly what I'm doing, but it's probably going to become like, you can imagine a prompt bot, right? Which you go to, it like asks you what you want, it figures out like exactly all the trade-offs, etc., and then it creates a prompt for another AI to then do it repetitively, already now knowing exactly what the process and thinking you've done. And so I'm imagining something like this will happen where AIs actually will write kind of the programmatic, like what we right now have for programmatic prompts, right? That are like behind an agent, right, where a user doesn't interact with that. And then on the user side, it will be more of a conversational plus UI plus, like we actually use a spec as a format where it like writes out stuff, and then you can read that and like correct it what you want, right? And that's actually really useful because you kind of see the whole context. You're like, oh, I want this user story, or like actually I want this new journey, I want this feature, and so it gives you like a lot more context on what's kind of in the model on the other side. So I'm imagining more of that, and then kind of generated programmatic prompts that go into the backend of the engine. I don't know if people disagree with me.
It's kind of a tricky conversation because Juanso is very back-end, hardcore hardware and all those pieces, and we're front-end app layer. So it's interesting bridging the gap. I don't want to take up too much time, Juanso, so go for it.
No, that's okay. Well, so I mean, since we're getting into the some of these technical questions, so as a crypto compute project, so Exabits is trying to find methods to provide users with more flexible ways to use compute. So think of the following example. So in compute DeFi, being able to swap ETH on Ethereum for a compute voucher on Solana, for compute lending, use SOL as collateral to borrow compute registered on NEAR. So we think NEAR's chain abstraction can help us abstract complexity of blockchain away from the user, which I think is a very valuable and critical a barrier for wider adoption. And first off, is that understanding correct? And how long do you think it would take to realize such a technical system?
Yeah, I mean, well, chain abstraction for sure is designed to, well, kind of as the idea to remove the need to think about which chain things are on, and instead move into user space where you just, indeed, as Nate said, like just describing with natural language what you want, right? And so, I mean, the use cases you described are exactly the type of things that we actually have projects that are using chain signatures to and building, right, kind of a multi-chain DeFi, multi-chain lending that that are working where, yeah, you can borrow against a combination of Bitcoin, Dogecoin, you know, some Milady and a you know, some locked VCRV on Ethereum, and then you can borrow USDT on Solana, right? And similarly, you can swap, or, you know, any combination of assets across different chains. So that is indeed kind of the direction we're going, as well as on the wallet side, right? Kind of what Bitte is doing, what HUD is doing, where you can kind of have like a singular view of assets across all chains. You don't actually need to think about like where they are, and you can navigate it, you know, either UI or natural language, where you say, hey, you know, I just want a position, like, I mean, I was typing an example, like, hey, I want an index of top 5 coins across all chains, right? And, you know, buy $5 worth of it, right? Like, I don't want to figure out like how to do that. It should just go, you know, fetch from CoinMarketCap, build me an index, and then, you know, buy kind of across all of them. And saying like, oh, I want, you know, I want to be able to have my AI run for an hour thinking about this problem, and I'm, you know, like I'll pay this whatever Ethereum, and so it, you know, buys a kind of compute coin in the way, and then pays for it when it actually runs the inference on the back end, right? For an agent that goes and like navigates and thinks through and writes out the chain of thought, and maybe writes some code and does all these things, and then comes back with you with an answer and saying like, hey, I spent, you know, this much compute pretty much on it. So like I can imagine all of that is kind of coming together pretty quickly, actually, because I know, you know, folks with wallets already doing some of this. The applications kind of are building this like multi-chain DeFi, multi-chain lending, are as well have like their kind of alpha versions starting to come together. So I would expect within like 3 months we have some of that kind of running live.
Right.
That's where we're also heading to with the UI building on the fly, being able to not only do swaps and these things, but say, give me a report of the charts of this, and then it just builds a nice pretty graph, and then zoom in a bit more on that. Okay, execute my swap on this based on these forms that I've processed. So yeah, I'm very on board.
Yeah, turn the table back to you, Nate or Alex. Do you have more to add?
Now we can move on if people have other
Okay.
fun questions.
Okay, what would be your ideal scenario for an open agent market connected with NEAR at the core? So I know you guys are working on an agent marketplace as well. I don't know how much you want to reveal of that land. I know it was revealed in a couple open office hours before, but just curious because we're also working on probably something that we could work together deeply on. I'm curious how we can work together to really build just an epic system that allows not just ecosystem partners, but with this cross-chain, you know, world that we're jumping into. How do we basically start taking over other chains? And I think we can do it pretty quick if we execute this right together, right? So the biggest question is, what is your ideal agent marketplace that is really focused on sort of either the execution layer or so on?
I mean, I can mention maybe a few components we're looking at, right? So the way we're thinking about it is kind of agent is anything that can take an environment, and we can talk about what the environment is, and perform set of actions, right? And so it has access to LLM, it has access to, you know, tools, it has access to any other stuff, including submitting transactions. So you can model that as just a Python, you know, file, Python script that executes that. The challenge obviously is like how to make it secure, how to do permissioning, how to do all of this kind of nitty-gritty details. And so that's where I think a lot of thinking and kind of designing is to go in, while also still iterating on, you know, some useful agents to build as kind of you guys are building. So I think the big important part is kind of how do we go to a situation where you can have, a very simple prompt that then opens up an environment, right, in a kind of in some private container, potentially goes like into a browser, opens up CoinMarketCap, fetches the required information, like for example, for this index of top 5 tokens, fetches that, brings it to kind of the agent that constructs for example, the buy transaction, right, and then passes it to back to the user to validate that this is exactly what they want. And so kind of how do you construct that containers where these actions can be executed? For example, they can navigate browsers, they can write code, they can execute some of the code as well within that environment. And so then this is also reusable for AI developers. This is usable for process automation where, NEAR Foundation, for example, somebody can just say like, hey, run this process. It goes like opens up browser and does that. Or somebody in the ecosystem is like, hey, I want to find all of the things that's going on in the ecosystem, and give it to me and in this format, and then potentially get me to contact people of the folks who are doing. So that's kind of the high level structure that we kind of thinking, and obviously the system itself, the code is all going to be open source, and so as well as the agents are just stored somewhere on chain, for example, over time to for anyone to be able to pick them up and use it. And then the questions are, like if there are additional use cases around, like you want to have agents that are paying each other because they need special data. How do you model data? How do you model payments, stuff like this, right? We have Nevermind, which doing payments, for example. There's a few projects that are doing kind of data coordination and like fetching, and you can add payments to all that. So kind of there's like somewhat of a framework that we're trying to conceptualize. And obviously, I mean, for context, we did talk with Nate about this on Friday. So we're going to have this kind of continue this conversation, and also hopefully can open source what we've been working on pretty soon.
Yeah, our world is trying to tackle both ends. It's not just the user typing in things to go do swaps and do things. I mean, blockchain has had such a horrendous onboarding, excruciating onboarding hurdles, right? Not only do you have to get users to figure out how to like buy NFTs, but you have to get brands to figure out how to create accounts and do all that sort of stuff. So being able to also enable brands to create agents super quick, like imagine LVMH being able to hook up their inventory sheets and being able to do a mass mint of NFTs, pegging every single asset to maybe some of their items with highly detailed explanation of what that asset is. And then people being able to search for those assets while they're watching a Netflix movie. I'd like to buy that red handbag from. That's really where I see us evolving over the number of years. It's not only helping reduce the onboarding for people interacting, but also for the other side, the asset creation. Because if we look at the traditional finance system, it's just not going to keep up with AI. There's just no way that AI is going to be able to evolve with traditional finance. AI is such a perfect match, being able to boot up accounts within seconds, do trades, create assets on the fly, ask its inventory sheets. So to me, the agent marketplace is really kind of this space where we can open it up where we're not doing all the work. We can focus a bit more on the security, right? Being able to say, this is a level 1 user who is just messing around. Don't let them do trades over $10, right? And then once they've messed around with a little bit more, maybe they can go higher. These sort of like security measures. We just want to focus in that land. Curious to get your thoughts, Alex.
It does sound a little bit like an episode of Black Mirror, when you can while watching a TV show, you can buy stuff from it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where we're heading.
Yeah, I think generally it's the definition of an agent still I think a lot depends on the definition of an agent, because an agent can be a very generic thing, right? arbitrary Python script running in a Docker container is an agent to some extent, right? But I do think so a couple of things that are definitely necessary. So you mentioned security. That's an interesting one, right? So not only like, hey, this is $10, but also ideally in the agent marketplace, it's two sides. Like there are consumers, there are providers, right? So ideally you want to limit quite a bit what providers can do, and that's something that, like I think, similar to how. What would be a good example? Like generally, in many aspects of our lives, security evolved as the system was building, right? Like Windows 95, you can run any process, and sure thing, very quickly all the computers were covered in viruses because, right? And then there was like Windows NT, which like patched it, right? But the security modes are not adequate for what we use systems today, right? Like for example, Linux security model is not quite adequate for like when you use PAP or npm install, you're running arbitrary code from some random person, and like really your security comes from you believing that whomever is moderating that package manager is not
Evil.
First of all, not malicious. Second of all, is actually paying attention, right? Similar to Hugging Face, like unknown to many, a model in Hugging Face is an arbitrary script, right? So whenever you install a model from Hugging Face, you're actually running someone's code from under your user, which is extremely dangerous, right? And so I think, like the moral is that if you first build a cool system and then start doing patchwork of security, you end up in a system where security is non-present, right? So I think like laying out a good security model ahead of time is actually a very good idea, and like putting a lot of effort into it, and maybe like involving security experts, and like that would be something that is extremely valuable for the community as a whole.
Micro actually built a script that just starts running. I don't know how amazing it was, but it was a good proof of concept that basically we show before you run the transaction all the function calls that you're doing in the contracts and all that. And below that, we had a little thing that says in plain English, this is what you're doing. You're interacting with this instead of, So yeah, it's going to be a crazy world we're going to.
Right. Because I think there are many. So whether or not we want it, at some point agents will have access, obviously, to the whole internet, to money, etc. Right. So it's yeah, it's.
I think I have a kind of follow-up question here. So we're seeing, for example, like Google just announced recently that they're enabling Gemini Nano to run on Chrome, right? So I think starting in version 1.28, so sometime soon, I think under some flags you can enable like the model to run locally. Also, we're seeing like Apple partnering with OpenAI to like run natively, sort of in the user's device, or at least have access to a bunch more data and access to a multitude of applications. So I'm just really wondering what's your guys' thoughts on this, and I know we're running quite late here, but yeah, just quite curious to see, like NEAR is building on the open web. Like we're all like, we really want the open web to succeed, and we want these open models and the decentralized execution, everything to succeed. But these are giant players that will have access to a lot of users, a lot of devices. And what are you guys' thoughts on this? And is this potentially harmful in the short term?
I think in case of OpenAI, like you can think of OpenAI's decision in the from perspective of the fact that they have had an integration with Google for a while now, right? Like if you go to Safari and type something in the address bar, it goes to Google, right? So it sort of makes sense because Apple needs to meet expectations of the users, and users are expecting to have access to the cool stuff. It is obviously harmful because OpenAI gets a massive data wheel, right? So they're already quite ahead of everybody else in terms of how much data they get from the users. Once it becomes the standard on Apple devices, they get significantly more data. I would expect I actually don't know the numbers, but in my head, what you get from integration with Apple is order of magnitude bigger than what you get from ChatGPT interface. All right, so it is definitely harmful for the effort of building an actual open artificial intelligence, right? And it's sort of, I think it's a it sort of points at the fact that time is running out, right? So if we started as a community a year ago, right, and maybe if we had some good options to offer today, it would be different, right? I'm pretty sure Apple is not happy with their privacy-centric approach to integrate ChatGPT. Just that open solutions were not like, I'm pretty sure they did some user studies, right? Because they had an option to run Llama, but they went with ChatGPT. So like clearly they did some research and concluded that ChatGPT turned out to be better. It's unlikely that ChatGPT OpenAI is bribing them, just like from the relative sizes of the companies and the resources they have. All right, but if there was something competitive in the open, I'm pretty sure Apple would have went with it. And so I think that sort of, but there will be, like I think as time passes, more and more the status, like the current market leader gets their roots into the ecosystem, and it's harder and harder to dethrone them. So obviously integration with Apple is one of them, and the faster we get to the state where open models compete, like agents and infrastructure in general, with the proprietary, the faster we will start turning the tide backward.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I think that the challenge is that we're living in the world where we have two kind of operating systems as well, right? Which one of them is developed by the company that is building AI models as well, and the other one is indeed. I mean, the actually interesting thing that they build the small models themselves that runs on the device, and then they are asking explicitly every time if you want to go, at least from their demos, to go to OpenAI, which, yeah, I think it kind of shows that they're not particularly happy with that approach, but kind of need to get the best result possible. So indeed, if there is a way to kind of provide a privacy first way, right, where, for example, you run it inside secure enclaves on H100s, right, in a distributed network, that would be something that might be more preferred. Now, there is more the question: is the data wheel actually that important going forward, right? If like at some point there's a saturation of the amount of data you can use, right, and it's maybe becomes more about synthetic data and like in general other methods. But we're over time. I want to thank everyone for joining. We had indeed a very wide range conversation. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, excited to work on this together and actually build something that is better product and more user owned going forward. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank
So
you.